Stand Brawl.
Ladies and gentlemen,
what you gonna do, brother?
Oh yeah!
Woo! What?
If you smell what the rock.
You got the wrong guy. I'm the dude, man.
What's up, everybody? It's Around the Turnbuckle. I'm the Big Al Boski. He is Professor Keith. No guest tonight, Keith, but we are. Our hearts are heavy. Our minds are heavy for one, Terry Funk. And we talked about him briefly on the last show. JT Cage brought him up on Wednesday because JT Cage looks up to him, as many wrestlers do. One of the greatest of all time in many people's books. And if you don't know what we're talking about, Terry Funk was diagnosed with dementia, and he's had a hospital stay. The latest update that I read is that they're sending him home soon. But with that in mind, keep your thoughts and prayers on Terry Funk. And with that also in mind, in his honor, Keith and I are going to talk a little bit tonight about hardcore wrestling, and who better to know hardcore wrestling than Professor Keith, my boy, because he's read the books on the subject. He was a huge fan of ECW back in the day. So, I mean, he's got this wealth of knowledge, so let's share it. First off, I read, falsely by the way, that hardcore wrestling got its start in Japan. Nope.
The professor's here to tell you something different.
Yeah, hardcore wrestling started in the Memphis territory under Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler. It started with the Tupelo concession stand brawl. If you type that into YouTube, you can find it because Memphis footage is weird. Almost nobody knows who owns it. That's why WWE doesn't have it yet, because it's hard to buy something if you can't figure out who exactly you need to talk to buy it from. But that's a whole other show to do, you know, who owns what and all that. And even then, we still wouldn't come to an answer because nobody really knows. But that is up on YouTube. And interestingly enough, one of the participants in that was Wayne Ferris. If you don't know who Wayne Ferris is, yes, you do. You just don't know. You just probably didn't know that that's the Honky Tonk Man's real name. So the Tupelo concession stand brawl happens, and it gets to Japan because Atsushi Onita, as a young guy, was doing his stay in America because with All Japan and New Japan back in the 70s and whatnot, I don't think they do it now. I would have to look that up, or if somebody in the audience knows, please enlighten us and correct me if I'm wrong. But back in the day, if you were a young boy, which was the proper term, don't get on me about this, I'm not being, you know, that guy. That's the term. If you were a young boy, if you were a rookie in Japanese wrestling, they sent you to America for a certain amount of time to learn. And you would learn in one of the NWA territories because the NWA had relationships mostly with All Japan. Inoki would try to get in there here and there, but mostly Inoki was working with the McMahons because the NWA was saying, look, we're with Baba. This is how we operate. When we pick somebody, you're a member, you're ours. If you're running opposition to our member, we cannot deal with you. So Onita comes over. Onita is learning. Onita sees the concession stand brawl. He sees the generally more violent nature of Memphis wrestling. Which, I mean, not just the concession stand brawl. Memphis in general was a much more violent promotion. If you go back and look at some of the footage that's been released, especially going back to Terry Funk, look at some of the stuff Terry Funk was involved in. It was always wild and crazy matches. You know, the empty arena match is a hardcore match. It is. And it ends, you know, famously with Terry Funk getting the piece of wood in his eye and going, my eye, Lawler, you son of a bitch, my eye. So Onita's here. Onita blows out his knee, and I mean blows his knee out. The damn thing nearly explodes.
Right.
Onita's never the same wrestler again. So Onita goes back to Japan and says, all right, I can't do the stuff that I was doing. I can't really be a wrestler in the sense that this audience would think of me as a wrestler, or maybe even the American audience would necessarily think of me as a wrestler. But there is all that stuff I saw in Memphis, all that violent stuff I saw in Memphis. What if I made matches and did a wrestling style that was just that? That was all about the violence, all about hitting people with objects, brawling, and I could, take it up a notch. I could put barbed wire into it. I could have explosions. I could do all these different things. So Onita starts to kind of bring the death match aspect into it in Japan, which starts to become popular with a certain niche audience, and then obviously it's getting imported over here. And again, in part because Terry Funk, who is just an absolute legend in Japan, is basically a Hulk Hogan-like figure, if not more so, where one of the only foreigners to really get over and become a massive babyface in Japan, a babyface that's even bigger than some of the local Japanese legends that you would think of. Like, they would practically hand him kids and be like, Mr. Terry, adopt my child. That's how serious that connection and that love was to Terry Funk. So when Terry Funk, and one of the things that I don't think Terry gets his praises sung enough of about for enough of the audience is Terry may question himself as a booker, and you can understand why when he had ideas like Dr. Knows It All or Mr. X or Chainsaw Charlie. Yeah, Chainsaw Charlie was Terry's idea, everybody. We can't blame Russo. Can't blame Russo for that one.
No.
They were gonna bring him in as Terry Funk. They were all ready to bring him in as Terry Funk, and he went, no, I think I need a gimmick. I'm gonna come in and be Chainsaw Charlie. So that was all Terry's idea. That's his fault. So I can see where Terry would look at that and go, yeah, you probably shouldn't make me your booker. But one thing Terry understood very well is which way the wind was blowing. And he always seemed to know what kind of the next big thing was going to be in wrestling. So Terry starts to pick up on what Onita's doing and taking bookings with FMW and all that over there. And he starts to kind of reinvent himself at around the mid-'80s or so after the WCW run is done, which, frankly, if you look at the last WCW run with Flair, that's pretty freaking violent, too. Like, that's kind of almost the beginnings of hardcore in America because it wasn't widely seen. We didn't see guys go through tables. Him pile-driving Flair through the table was like the first time that happened. The plastic bag angle was considered so extreme by TBS that they were like, we're not fucking airing it. And never did it again. So Funk kind of starts to reinvent himself. He obviously gets into the legendary deathmatch tournament in IWA. He gets Mick Foley involved, and that kind of starts to popularize hardcore wrestling. And when Paul Heyman is brought into Eastern Championship Wrestling to be the booker and to try to make something of these guys, he really starts to gravitate to the Memphis style, to the FMW style with Onita, and actually winds up making deals with Onita later on in ECW's lifetime. You can find DVDs of this if you go out there and look. I got a copy off eBay. FMW, when they were putting out some of their stuff, and they did put it out commercially here in the U.S. So like I say, if you go on eBay, you can still find the DVDs. It won't break your bank. I think I got the one I got for maybe like $10, something like that. So I mean, it's cheap if you're interested. The one with ECW is called International Slaughterhouse. So they start trading talent back and forth and things like that. And that's kind of where you get to, obviously, the popularity of hardcore, whereas we understand it, where you have everything ECW did, and then WWE does their version of it, which is a little watered down, and WCW does their version of it, which is more watered down. But again, there's still enough in the WWE and the WCW runs before it gets, just completely silly, with Eric Bischoff winning the WCW hardcore title, or, the 24/7 rule in WWE where, Raven is a 700-time hardcore champion and Crash Holly is a 600-time, and, all that nonsense. There is good, fun stuff there, even within what they do.
So let's go back and define what we're talking about as far as a hardcore match goes. Because if you go on the internet, which I've been doing all day, trying to find some of the best matches ever. You Google that shit. The first stuff that comes up is the top 10 WWE hardcore matches of all time. And then you try to dig further, and then you get to like the 25 bloodiest matches of all time, but not necessarily they weren't hardcore. They could have been regular normal matches that just ended up getting bloody.
And I mean, cage matches used to have blood as a prerequisite.
So what is your definition of hardcore match? Because I want to be clear on what we're talking about, because it doesn't necessarily have to be I mean, we're not talking about just something where, you know, there was blood involved. No, we're talking about where, like, hardcore, as far as, you know, there's no rules. They use weapons. I mean, other than that,
I mean, that's a very good start to a definition. I would say a hardcore match is any match where the athletes are willing to go to a level of danger, yet still have it end within the confines of what we understand as wrestling. Because I think there is a difference between, say, a hardcore match, which is a lot of what ECW did,
right,
and something like a death match,
right,
where promotions like IWA Mid-South,
right,
and some of the others out there, where they're using the light tubes, and it's more about not really necessarily having a lot of pure wrestling holds or anything. It's more like we're going to have a fight in a wrestling ring.
Yes.
And it's going to be more about the weaponry and the level of violence and the level of pain and the level of maiming sometimes.
And it seems like they continue to try to outdo themselves.
I think they do. And I mean, obviously there's real danger in that. And that's one of the things where, you know, I don't personally watch a lot of that, because I get to a place where I get personally uncomfortable. I understand why people do it, and you know, it's America,
and it has a core audience. Deathmatch has a cult following,
right? You know, if you want to do that to yourself and you want to watch that, and everybody is being as safe as you can in something like that, and by that I mean, like, you know, hopefully you're getting HIV tests, you're getting, you know, tests for hepatitis, you're getting tests for any kind of bloodborne disease that's out there. If you're doing it safely, it may not be my cup of tea, but you know what? As long as it's grown-ass adults that agree to do this, hey, it is what it is.
To me, though, I think the deathmatch, that mentality, or that those organizations that just put on death matches, kind of took off of stuff that's happened in the past, right? Like they're like, oh, I mean, they were influenced with the blood and the guts and the intestinal fortitude of guys like Terry Funk, and they kind of took it, you know, and then they kind of, like, you know, glommed on it over here in the States, kind of glommed on the ECW, and then they're like, you know, you get a bunch of those crazy bastards together. They're like, okay, they got something going on here, and we know that deathmatch tournament out in Illinois that IWA is putting on soon this summer. So, I mean, they do this every year. They get the craziest of the crazies all over the country, and they come in and they have basically a deathmatch tournament.
And CZW's done it before too, and whatnot. And I mean, there is an element to that too, of like with Onita, where it's
Mr. Ping.
Hello, sir.
What's up, Mr. Ping? Now you want to talk about hardcore?
Yeah, there's someone that knows about hardcore.
There's someone that knows about hardcore there. CCW. But yeah, the thing of the matter is like, in case you're just joining us, we're talking hardcore wrestling. We're talking the history of hardcore wrestling. Keith basically went down the path of where it kind of came from, where it got its roots. And a lot of us that are, you know, maybe not me personally, but anybody who's probably 35 or under probably knows hardcore more about what they've seen in WWE's version. Maybe so a little bit of ECW. You might have caught some ECW when you were a kid, but you know, I I was in my 20s when ECW was in its heyday. So, I mean, I vividly remember a lot of ECW stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, when you talk about hardcore, you know, it is going to be ECW in a lot of ways because they do have a lot. They had a big reach, and they've had a lot of infamous matches. And I think that, again, is one of the differences between a hardcore and a death match. And I think you do have to draw the line between the two because there were definitely instances where ECW would do something and it would go to a place they didn't intend. And then they would back off and they would say, we're never doing that again. And sometimes, yeah, it was because the thing didn't work. Like the November to Remember 93 was Public Enemy in a tag match versus, I apologize, I'm forgetting who they were wrestling. But it was supposed to be an exploding ring.
Yeah, I can bring that up quick.
You know, well, while Alan brings that up, I'll just finish explaining what the stip was and what happened. It was supposed to be like an exploding ring, or there was supposed to be an explosion, or the team that lost was supposed to get blown up or something like that. And the effect didn't go off and it didn't work. So they
Did you say 93?
93, November to Remember.
Okay.
And the effect didn't go off, and they said, well, look, we obviously screwed up. We're sorry, we're not going to do it again. And then you fast forward another year or so, and you have the infamous fire chair incident where Cactus Jack gets out the fire chair to use on Terry Funk, which is something they'd done in Japan a bunch. And the fire chair is a towel dipped in kerosene, draped over the chair, with the chair folded up, so it's over the lip and under the hood where your back rests. And you obviously swing it down and hit the opponent, kind of smother the flame, and you pull it back up, and there you go. Everybody's
the match the match, not to interrupt you, but the match you were referring to, you said Suicide Blondes.
Suicide Blondes. There you go. Yes. Yeah.
Suicide Blondes, Johnny Hotbody and Tony Stetson defeated Axel Rotten and Ian Rotten.
No, that's a different one. I must have the year wrong.
It's on that card.
Public Enemy, I thought.
What's that?
I'm positive it was Public Enemy.
Public Enemy wasn't on the 93 card.
Okay, maybe I'm thinking 94 then.
Oh, wait, they were. I'm sorry. Public Enemy took on Bad Company.
Okay.
Pat Tanaka and Paul Diamond.
You know, maybe it wasn't Public Enemy because I think that match aired on ECW TV.
The main event of that one that you're talking about was a winner-takes-all match for the ECW title and TV title, where it was Sabu and Road Warrior Hawk versus Terry Funk and King Kong Bundy.
Yeah, no, I know it was an exploding cage. So it was some kind of explosion match, and it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And they never did it. They never did it again, except for a house show with Balls Mahoney against. It was either Vic Grimes or PN News, and it didn't really work there either. But at least in their case, then it was the dying days of the company, and it was at a house show, so nobody saw it unless they bought the fan cam tape of it.
All right, so
or now you go on YouTube because it's probably on YouTube too.
All right, so quickly, I'm looking up. Public Enemy was in November to Remember 94 against Cactus Jack and Mikey Whipwreck.
Maybe it wasn't Public Enemy because I know that match aired too.
Yeah.
I know there was something where they didn't explode. It was supposed to be an explosion match. The explosion didn't work.
Right.
And they apologized that it didn't work. I think they offered people refunds. And they said, we won't do it again because obviously we don't know how to do this. So we're not going to do it.
You mean what AEW tried to do?
Yeah. Yeah. But at least ECW owned it, whereas AEW just did, frankly, the worst idea ever on it. And I'm not going to crap on them again. So go look it up on the internet. Go look up Tony Khan's comments and you tell me if you think that's an acceptable way to speak to your fans after you promised them a stipulation and didn't deliver on it.
What's a Mexican death match?
It depends, I think. I want to say when I've seen things done with it, It's similar to Texas Death. Which a Texas Death match, for those that don't know, is a last man standing match, but you have to pin your opponent first. So first you beat the guy down so badly that you can get a 1, 2, 3 pinfall. Then the 10 count starts, and you have to get up before the 10 count. So the last man standing just takes the pinfall out of it.
Right, all right, because that they had a November to
And
Remember.
the Funks invented the Texas Death Match in Amarillo.
Well, 95 November to Remember featured a Mexican death match versus Rey Mysterio versus Psychosis.
I think that wound up just being something where they were allowed to bring weapons, but mostly because of who was in it and how young they were. They just did a lot of lucha stuff because nobody had really seen lucha in this country at that point. So you didn't need the weapons or anything. It was just an excuse to kind of be like, they're going to do shit and not have rules, and they can jump off of everything. And you ooh and ah to these guys jumping off of everything.
Well, anyway, ECW kind of brought it mainstream.
Oh, absolutely.
People had heard of hardcore wrestling before. People have heard of, when I was a kid, I had heard of backyard stuff. I remember there was like a video that came out of a compilation of backyard wrestling where it was deathmatch style, where,
Yeah.
I mean, even as far back as the late 80s, early 90s, where there was like there was like this backyard wrestling DVD that came out. So I got a hold of one and I watched it, and I gotta admit I wasn't a fan. I was a fan of ECW,
yeah,
because ECW knew how to use it right, and there was a reason. Yeah, and there was a reason why they did it when they did it. It wasn't just, hey, look, here goes another guy through a table, or hey, look, there was actually wrestling mixed around there. It wasn't like you called it earlier, a fight in a wrestling ring with weapons. It was actually ECW actually mixed some great wrestling in there, and then just didn't have any rules.
Right, and you would have guys that would use weapons to accentuate their style, like Sabu and Van Dam, for instance, were not going to whack you with the chair 700 times, but they would have moves that they would need the chair to do it. Like for Sabu to do a triple jump moonsault, he needs a chair set up for jump 1 is jump 1 to the chair, jump 2 is jump off of the chair onto the top rope, and then jump 3, your triple, is the actual moonsault backwards on the opponent.
And then he would do like
and
the Van Daminator.
Can't do a Van Daminator without the chair in front of the guy's face for the extra added, ouch.
You're right. So back to Terry Funk, we were talking about. So the first ever ECW pay-per-view, correct me if I'm wrong, they brought in Terry. That they featured that on that Beyond the Mat, I believe.
Yes, Terry was working for them on and off. Terry built ECW in a lot of ways because Terry was there in 93. He was actually on their first television show as a commentator. They brought him in for kind of the credibility and whatnot. And he actually famously said at the end of that episode, well, thanks for sticking with us. I know it wasn't very good this week, but stay with us. We'll get better. We'll do better.
Right.
So Terry was there for the first year and a half, I want to say, and kind of was there as it turned into Extreme Championship Wrestling from Eastern. When you look at it, he got a title reign before it was a world title in Eastern, and he's also a former television champion, but they didn't acknowledge it because, again, that was Eastern. He beat Superfly Jimmy Snuka for it. And they weren't acknowledging in Extreme. They looked at their title history as no, it started on the night Shane Douglas throws down the NWA title and makes our title a world title. So anyone who had a title then is the start of the ECW championship lineage. And really, they were more concerned about the world title lineage and making sure that never got broken, where a guy would be out hurt and have to forfeit it or anything like that, where the other titles, they did have problems at least once where somebody got hurt and had to forfeit it.
Now, you would consider other quote unquote gimmick matches like cage matches are Hell in the Cell. You wouldn't consider them hardcore, right?
I wouldn't. They are on the line of it. They are that going to more extremes. But I think a gimmick match, and those matches were designed to be blow-offs. They were designed to be, you do that and the feud is over.
Right.
And these guys are going to separate for a long time. And maybe we'll come back to it. Maybe we never will. But the idea is, if you have gone to this level, whoever wins, that's it. We're done. The feud is concluded for now. Whereas in a hardcore match, you wouldn't necessarily conclude the feud. It could even be the start of the feud, depending, because in instances like Rob Van Dam, let's say, and Jerry Lynn, they were not concluding their series with the first match, which did get hardcore. You know, you had weapons, you had injury and problems. You know, at Hardcore Heaven 99, Jerry Lynn famously took a Van Daminator, excuse me. The Van Terminator hadn't been invented yet. People know it as Coast to Coast. It's called a Van Terminator. Just saying. I'm big, and I say that because I'm big on, if a guy invents something and he names it, that's what it's called.
Right.
Pure and simple. That is what it's called. Unless you can create your own spin on it that changes it just enough that you can say, no, I do it differently enough that I can call it something else. When you do the exact same goddamn thing, which a Coast to Coast is the exact same goddamn thing, you do not get to rename it. It's a Van Terminator. Give Rob Van Dam $1 every time you do it. That's it.
So let's get into what you have. You know, you've seen plenty of matches in your day, as I have. What are some of the greatest / bloodiest hardcore matches in history?
I mean, if we're going from what is like the most memorable stuff,
right?
First Stairway to Hell, Sandman and Sabu jumps to mind. Where, if you've never seen or heard of a Stairway to Hell, what a Stairway to Hell is it's a ladder match, but instead of a title or money or something being held above the ring that you have to grab and then the match ends once you free it, a Stairway to Hell is you put a weapon above the ring, usually barbed wire. There are only 3 of them that ECW ever did. 2 of them were with barbed wire, and 1 of them was a Singapore cane.
A barbed wire bat, right?
No, straight up barbed wire.
Straight up barbed wire, okay.
Straight up barbed wire. Sandman and Sabu was straight up barbed wire. Dreamer Incredible 1 was the Singapore cane at Guilty as Charged 99. And then at Wave 2000, it was Dreamer Credible again, but they put straight barbed wire up there again. They never really were big on the barbed wire bats or any of that stuff. I think that was more Japan and something that, you know, the other companies and kind of used as like, this looks impressive and terrifying. And I don't remember anybody in ECW really ever using a barbed wire bat. I could be wrong, but I don't remember anybody. Maybe it's because nobody featured it. And I know Public Enemy used baseball bats, but I don't think they ever wrapped them in barbed wire. But I could be wrong.
So
Stairway to Hell 1, I would say. Born to be Wired is just, it's another level. Terry Funk and Sabu. It's a hard match to watch. And that, again, is the difference to me between a promotion that does hardcore and a promotion that does deathmatch. And again, I'm not saying it to say one is right, one is wrong.
Right.
But the difference being, after Born to be Wired with Sabu and Funk, which actually wound up with Sabu winning the world title when he wasn't supposed to, because they had gotten tangled in the barbed wire and could not be separated. So an audible was called that just, fuck it, Sabu's on top of him, count it, so we can get this over with. And we
That's
get crazy. In there, and we can get somebody in there to cut them free. Because Sabu had already ripped open his bicep and glued it shut and needed about 100 stitches, and he still has the scar.
Yeah.
From it.
Which we may see on July 24th. I don't know.
Yeah, come try to find Sabu and look at his scars.
Yeah.
You know?
Why if you're in the Pennsylvania, we're not to interrupt you, Keith. We're going to get back to that conversation, but I just want to mention this before I forget. If you're in the Pennsylvania area or the Lehigh Valley area, Check out Legends of Hamburg Professional Wrestling Fan Fest. Keith and I will be there at around the turnbuckle table selling some merchandise and doing some on-the-spot interviews. Also, there's other podcasts from the area there. Lots of wrestlers will be there, lots of legends. For tickets and information, go to www.legendsofhamburg.com. The list keeps growing of the legends that are going to be there. Lots of ECW guys are going to be in attendance, Keith. Also, like guys like Tito Santana and Mouth of the South Jimmy Hart and the living legend Larry Zbyszko, and on and on and on it goes on. So, the Blue Meanie.
It's going to be so hard to be a professional broadcast journalist.
So everybody, in the area, man, check it out. It's going to be fun, man. If you dig things like Comic-Con and stuff like this is Comic-Con for wrestling enthusiasts.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I have in front of me, Keith, the top 10 WWE, because why not? Because we've been talking.
Just to finish.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
The difference. After that match, ECW said we're never doing no rope barbed wire matches again, and they never did. And that to me is the difference, I think, between a promotion that's hardcore versus a promotion that's deathmatch. Because if it's deathmatch, you would almost look at a situation like that. And again, consenting adults, and I know everybody would look at it that way. The performers would look at it that way too, of like, this was great shit. This was the objective. We need to keep doing this. Potentially next time out, up the ante even further.
And speaking of deathmatch, coming up on July 25th, the day after this fan fest down there that you see scrolling at the bottom of your screen, Keith and I will be back for Around the Turnbuckle, and we are going to have ECW original Ian Rotten and the queen of the deathmatch, Rebecca Payne, getting ready for that ICW Mid-South deathmatch tournament out there in Illinois. It's going to be spectacular for all you deathmatch enthusiasts out there, for all you hardcore fans out there who want the blood. Man, it's a hell of an event. They do it every year. So we're going to talk to them about that on the 25th, the day after the Fan Fest. So we're gonna wind this down, Keith, with I have in front of me, and I want you to rank them on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 because they're WWE. I love when you criticize WWE. So 1 means meh, 10 means they really tried to, actually put on a great show, even though it was WWE. Okay. So number 10 is Edge versus Mick Foley at WrestleMania 22. From a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give that?
I think I have to go with, for everything that was in it, for what they did with it, for what the story was, and the right guy wins in the end.
Yeah,
I think it's a solid 10. It's the best hardcore thing WWE ever did.
Right off the bat. All right, so number 9 is from NXT TakeOver Chicago 2, Johnny Gargano versus Tommaso Ciampa.
Oh, that's hard because Gargano and Ciampa always, again, to me, it goes back to a storytelling. Are we doing the violence because there's a purpose for the violence?
Right.
Or did we do the violence because somebody in the back just decided, I want a hardcore match here? You go out there and hit each other with some shit and try to, make the audience see some logic and reason in this other than just, you're a sick bastard and you just want to hit another sick bastard with some, because there needs to be some. I know some people don't care about this, but for me, for my mileage, if you're going to do violence on somebody, there should be a reason. You should dislike that person enough that it makes sense to do it. So I'm thinking that's another 10. I loved everything Gargano and Ciampa did.
Back-to-back 10s from the professor. All right, so I know this one's going to go down a notch. JBL versus John Cena, Judgment Day 2005.
This is going to go down many notches.
Just because I said the name John Cena.
No, because you said John Cena and then you said he wrestled JBL.
He did.
And JBL was just, no.
Okay.
I'm going to say probably a 6.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think the product was really
JBL
great at that
busted, in
point.
case you don't remember that match, JBL busted Cena open with a chair, and later Cena sent JBL through a TV monitor, busting him open.
Yeah.
This was one of the few post-Attitude Era WWE pay-per-views to get a mature rating on the network.
Yeah, and I can see it with what was going on there. I mean, you know, obviously they worked hard. You can't fault them for that. I mean, anybody who goes through a monitor, but I've never been a JBL fan. That's around the time that John Cena still kind of had some of his street cred that I
Yep.
think people liked him for, which would obviously go away very soon after he won the title for the first time, because then we started to get into, you know, what I would call the Disney-fied John Cena, where he and Vince are really collaborating and going like, oh, let's go back to making you like Hulk Hogan. And it's like, people didn't, if people wanted Hulk Hogan, you know, they'd get Hulk Hogan, or
Right.
Hulk Hogan would go out there and bless somebody to be the next Hulk Hogan. Like,
Right.
the,
So,
people
all
didn't
right.
want
So,
that.
next one, number 7, is Kurt Angle versus Shane McMahon at King of the Ring 2001. That's the infamous where Angle was supposed to back body drop him through
It's on all
and he
the
bounced right,
DVDs, yeah.
and he bounced off of it twice, and then he had to do it the other way, through the other way, to shatter the glass.
Shane McMahon
Yeah,
has the biggest cock and balls
he
of any
does.
rich guy
He
ever.
does.
He has a bigger cock and balls than I do, because I would never do half the shit that he does.
Right.
Like,
It
Vince
makes
wants to
I
talk
don't
about
like
his
him.
grapefruits,
I
and it's
don't
like,
like his
your
matches.
son has iron balls.
I don't like his matches
No,
for the most part.
I don't either, and especially because it's the whole problem with the McMahon's post-Attitude Era, is
But
that it worked Attitude Era because you guys remembered you're not workers, and when
right,
you get in there with workers, you should be afraid, and the only way Shane has a chance is to do stupid shit,
right,
where it would be like, oh, well, yeah, if a guy jumped off a fucking, you know, scaffolding 20 feet in the air and hits you,
yes,
I don't care who you are. A guy jumped off a scaffolding 20 feet in the air. You're
right,
done. It's going to knock the wind out of you for 3 seconds, you know, long enough for a pinfall at least. When we got to where it is now, where it's like Shane McMahon is wrestling Kane and going toe to toe, and Kane is selling for him, and Shane is looking like Jesus Christ superstar. No, because he's not a worker. But when we go back to even then, where they still understood what their positioning should be, you know, Shane has giant brass balls, and
he
Kurt
does.
Angle could work with a broomstick at that point
All
and
right,
make it look good. I'm gonna give them a solid 8. I'm gonna give them an 8
Okay.
in that one.
Okay. Moving on. Kane versus Raven versus Big Show for the hardcore title at WrestleMania X7.
I remember this.
Yes, it went to the back.
I liked this.
It was fun.
It was fun, but it is also ridiculous.
Right.
You know, it was kind of that period of the hardcore title being kind of completely ridiculous, and there's formula to it, and comedy seeps into it. I'm going to say, because it was a 3-way, it was a very good 3-way, but it was a 3-way, I'm going to say it's a 7. Solid 7. Just a shade under, you know, being an 8.
Number 5, Triple H versus Shawn Michaels, SummerSlam 2002. This is the Shawn Michaels return match.
For how hard they worked, for everything that went into it, you got to remember the emotional factor, and I was watching it and experiencing it as it happened.
Yeah.
For me, it was a 10.
Okay. Another 10. Awesome. Number 4, The Rock versus Mankind at the Royal Rumble. That's the infamous one where he's handcuffed and he hits him with the chair 600 times.
That was a too far.
Terrible.
And everybody involves
with his wife and kids in the front row. Yeah. That's the one they highlight on that movie, right?
Yeah, because originally
That was
they were gonna make them a feature of it, even on the broadcast itself, where they were gonna show Colette and all that. And of course, she and the kids got so upset they
so
scrapped the
right,
idea
and that was
quickly.
a I Quit match, by the way.
Right.
The
Um.
number. Well, what would you give that one? A 6 or 7 for the effort?
Yeah, for the effort. But I mean, for the content and everything that went into it, it's uncomfortable. It's not
Right.
something I have any desire to go back and watch again. It's too much. It's over the line. It's too far.
Number 3, Edge and Mick Foley together versus Terry Funk and Tommy Dreamer at One Night Stand '06.
Yeah. Solid 7. It was good for what it was. It accomplished what it was supposed to accomplish. It was reminiscent of an actual ECW tag match. It reminded me of, and I know it was supposed to, Cactus and Shane versus Sandman and Terry.
Yeah.
I think they even broke out some of the same spots
Right.
from that match for this one.
It's almost
I
like
think
they watched it and said, "Hey, let's do that."
yeah, and they were trying to, they were trying to walk that line about getting the old school ECW fan in there while not trying to tick off the WWE fan. What I would call part of the bait and switch campaign that WWE ECW was.
Number
I'm
2,
going to say solid 7.
number 2, Raven versus Rhino at Backlash 2001. This is WWE's attempt to take an ECW rivalry and stick it in WWE.
Well, wait. Well, yeah, it was a little bit of a rivalry for a minute because Rhino was kind of going up
Well,
as
towards
Raven
the end of
getting ready to
ECW.
go away. Yeah, because Raven was in that second run, and I
Mm-hmm.
think he and Rhino crossed paths as Rhino was starting to come up and become a thing. I remember loving this. That's got the famous spot where Raven had the shopping cart in the ring and
Yes.
Rhino goes for a gore
Yes.
and gores himself into the shopping cart.
Correct. He went for the gore. He went into the shopping cart.
Yeah, which was a great visual.
Sure.
I think Rhino is one of the probably of the last 10 years, 20 years now. Fuck, I'm old. Of the last 20 years, Rhino is the most criminally underutilized performer that I have seen. And I know he's coming to the end of the road, and that's a shame that there's not going to be that. I think one last great run where he's finally allowed to put it all together. I think as close as we're going to get to that is the Heath Slater tag team that he had, which again is just another example of something that could have and should have been so much more, and it gets cut off. It's a shame how much Rhino was involved in that. I'm saying this match is a 9. I loved it. It's one of those things that I would definitely go back, and if I wanted to show somebody that, the WWF Hardcore title wasn't always all comedy and stupidity.
Right.
And it was at times guys working hard and being able to have, really good matches that
and
are
those two guys always worked hard.
Yeah. And that it's stuff that's rewatchable, and there was a point that title looked like something you could look forward to watching and you could believe somebody wanted. That would be one of the matches I would show people.
Cactus Jack versus Triple H at Royal Rumble 2000.
10. It's easily one of my favorite matches ever.
Mm-hmm. That's an absolute 10 for me as well.
Yeah.
That was the one with the infamous promo where Dude Love and Mankind are talking to each other, and they bring out Cactus Jack, and all three of them are together.
That was 97. That was
97?
That was for MSP, yeah.
Okay.
Because that was when they were trying to get the whole...
I get them confused.
Yeah, they were trying to get the whole, Hell is Frozen Over, Cactus Jack is in WWE.
Right.
Everybody, at the time would have thought, well, that's never going to happen because, it had gotten around that Vince was no fan of Cactus Jack and the idea of Cactus Jack. And Jim Ross has even said, Vince brought him in specifically because Vince thought he would fail and he wanted JR to have the experience of a talent breaking his heart.
All right, Keith. So we're going to wrap.
Genius, and he knows everything.
we're gonna wrap this up by saying we at Around the Turnbuckle, our thoughts and prayers are with Terry Funk, his family. I have to go pick up Teresa, so I'm gonna jump out of here early, and then I'm supposed to have a quick 15-20 minute thing with TJ in the 7 o'clock hour. So if you guys are interested in what Mr. Spitter has to say at 7 o'clock, tune on in, and I'll be back for that. Keith and I will be back tomorrow at 6 o'clock with young Flash Carter at 6 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. I cannot wait to talk to him, and let me tell you something, brother. He cannot wait to talk to us.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
He is very excited. Young man, 19, almost 20 years old. Green as grass. Spank a baby's bottom new, as Theo Ivory would say. But yeah, we're going to talk to him tomorrow. He's building a brand. He's already off and running. I've seen some of his matches. Can't wait to talk to him, sit down with him. Flash Carter tomorrow at 6 o'clock right here on Around the Turnbuckle. In the meantime, Keith, you got any parting gifts?
I do. So Tommy Dreamer did post an update after talking to Terry the other week, and he said that Terry said, well, I'm here in this assisted living facility, sitting around with a thumb up my ass, whistling Dixie, and I forgot the words. And that is quintessential Terry Funk.
That's quintessential.
Something else that's quintessential Terry Funk. Don't give up.
Right.
Fight forever.
Forever.
Don't give up. Fight forever.
Very good.
And ever. And ever. Love you, Terry.
Well said, brother. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Ladies and gentlemen, what you gonna do, brother? Oh yeah! Woo! What? What? If you smell what the rock